India. How crucial have these projects been in helping Sri Lanka recover from the crisis?
As you know, the crisis began a couple of years ago, and India was the biggest assistance out of the countries, particularly giving us $4 billion, at that time. Because it's the first time in history that Sri Lanka has been unable to service its debt, and therefore technically described as bankrupt. So it was a welcome assistance at that time, because India wants a peaceful Sri Lanka. India doesn't want social unrest, and therefore that financial assistance. And that came in many different ways and many different projects. And so therefore, I would say it is significant. One significant thing I would like to say is the Indian philosophy of assistance in the neighborhood first policy is that this direct assistance is in a crisis, but in the long run, India wants to encourage investment in the country rather than providing debt, because countries like ours have got into problems with actually getting debt. So while the Indian government has laid some foundation, I think a significant thing is that the conversation has moved more and more to creating an investment environment and attracting private sector Indians to come here. The upgrading of the railway track certainly helps, because we haven't used our railways as a big attraction in tourism, but it can become a much bigger attraction, and therefore certainly it was welcome.
And how important was the aid given by India during the economic crisis?
It was important because when you're in a crisis, right, you need, you really, it's a cash flow crisis, not just a balance sheet crisis. And to overcome the cash flow crisis, you need assistance. And the fact that India came in and provided the aid. And the other thing India did when we had to restructure the debt, it became the co-chairman of the committee, which also helps, because India is a large country, it's the biggest in the neighborhood, and it shows that India places Sri Lanka as an important neighbor, and therefore it was certainly very helpful, and even the debt negotiations were certainly assisted by India participating as a co-chair in those discussions.
And several projects have been signed yesterday. India and UAE will be helping in making Trinacon Mail an energy hub. How do you see the outcomes of the visit?
I would put it in balance like this. India and Sri Lanka being very close neighbors. India is the big country and Sri Lanka is a small country. So you will always have issues about big and small. And this is not new. I keep telling people this is not new. This is not an issue of yesterday or today. I'm sure this issue prevailed 2,000 years ago when our kings had to negotiate with very large neighbors. So in a big and small discussion, always the smaller parties, I'm not referring to Sri Lanka only, even other countries, need to be comfortable. Therefore, every country, including Sri Lanka, we have our distinct identity, we have our culture, and then we want to maintain our sovereignty. And it's within that framework that this visit has been viewed. Because in the past, we have had some unpleasant history where government and India have cooperated, particularly I remember 1987 with the Indo-Lanka Pact and so forth. And people didn't buy into it. And as a result, there was tension. And unfortunately, it ended with the assassination of an Indian Prime Minister. The one big shift here is those who have been opposed over decades to the relationship with India in different ways are now in office, and they are forging ahead the relationship, which I think is a very, very big positive, that their position and their stance has changed. because we need to look at this beyond political parties, about countries. And I think that's one of the big positives in this visit, because the party the president represents, and I saw the ministers who were, in conversation with President Modi, were people belonging to a party which traditionally opposed a lot of things that were Indian. And therefore, I think it's a major step forward, and this trip will help to further consolidate and build the relationship with India. This is something the other political parties have always tried to do, and these parties have been in opposition, and it's good to see them coming on board.
And how important has this visit of PM Modi been in refreshing bilateral ties between India and Sri Lanka?
I think it's important because this is, I think, his fourth visit in a decade. And this is post a new president and a new government coming into office. And as everybody knows, this government, in a sense, was propelled by a party which actually thought that change can only come through revolution, and that's the use of force. And they have been democratically elected in Sri Lanka, and that says something about Sri Lanka's democracy, and that's embedded in the hearts of people, that we are a democracy and change must come through a vote. And therefore, it was good to see that this government embracing the realities on the ground rather than being ideologically driven. And so this relationship could have been much stronger if they came into this realization years earlier. But it's really strengthening to see and heartening to see that they have acknowledged some of their past mistakes, and they want to build on the relationship with our closest neighbor, and recognizing some of the fundamentals. So one of the fundamentals which they have reiterated is that Sri Lanka is so close to India physically, geographically, culturally, right? And it should be a mutually strong relationship, and that relationship doesn't undermine Sri Lanka's sovereignty, friendship with all countries. Investors are invited from everywhere, but we do nothing which will undermine or threaten India's concerns, and particularly its defense concerns. So several MoUs were signed yesterday. We don't know all the details of the MoUs, and I'm hoping that the government will make it public, because that's a way to build trust in the country. And so I think significant steps have been taken on this trip.
And how is the economic recovery shaping up in Sri Lanka?
We are in the first stage, yes, and the first stage is the stage of creating stability. So with the International Monetary Fund program in place, creating macro stability, and that stability to some extent has been created. It was created prior to this government coming in. The major steps were taken by the former president and government, because the Rajapaksas basically did away with the stability program of 2015-19. And that's why Sri Lanka got into a huge mess within 2 years. And they did away with even the agreement with the IMF. So it's been building gradually, and that stability is there. I think the challenge now is, how do you move from stability to growth? I think that's the big challenge, because we have to start repaying our debt in 2028, and the country needs to grow. And that's the huge challenge. So one heartening thing is to see this government, right, recognize that the Indian economy is growing very fast, one of the fastest growing economies in the world. The 5 southern states of India are the fastest growing states in the world, and that Sri Lanka is its closest neighbor. And Sri Lanka has some USPs, unique selling propositions, in terms of the sea routes, in terms of our geographical location, in terms of logistics, and there are good reasons why we need to partner. So the partnerships have been focused on connectivity, digitization, on energy, on health, and then also on basically using technology and technology transfers that could be handled. This is in addition to whatever that has been agreed in terms of defense cooperation. So I think that the signing in the MOU is one thing, building confidence of the people is another, and I think the government should endeavor to build confidence of the people because I think that there's much to be gained by Sri Lanka and India cooperating and working, and Sri Lanka benefiting from India's economic growth.
And what are the economic challenges that still remain in Sri Lanka?
I would say the biggest economic challenges that remain are to do with investors coming and investing. Because ultimately for Sri Lanka to get out of this, while in the short term we can have aid and grants and concessionary financing from governments, including the Indian government, ultimately it's to do with investment. So there are some barriers to foreign investment, and if you talk to businessmen, they will always tell you. And therefore some reforms are needed. So one of the reforms is, I would say, the rule of law. You see, if you have a commercial transaction, a commercial dispute, it may be with the government or with a private party, you really need a resolution fast. And therefore, commercial justice should be meted out, very, very quickly in months rather than in years. And that's something that needs to be put right. I would say government can take an initiative, but the legal community in this country also needs to really comprehend that's very fundamental. Because before an investor puts his money and looks at the industry and the project, he looks at the country risk. This is a former banker talking, and therefore looking at it from the investor's point of view. And so seeing that the system really works so that there's a dispute, it can be resolved fast, one. Two is they're looking at land, whether it's an office or if it's a factory or whatever, getting approvals and getting the land and getting it fast. They're not going to be waiting for 2-3 years because they have other options, even in Asia, that they would go through. And they have shown that in the last 20 years, they've gone to the other countries, to Vietnam, to Bangladesh, and other places. And so that land reform needs to take place fast. Then labor. Generally, the conversation in the country has really been on the rights of workers in Sri Lanka. And the party the president represents has, for the last 50 years, always championed the cause of workers' rights, trade union rights, and so forth. Hardly anybody has talked about the consumer, you see, and that shift needs to happen. It's the consumer that matters more than anyone else. It's a consumer that should get prime place. He needs to get the best quality at the best price. And therefore, labor reforms will have to happen if investors are going to put their money, so that investors would come and they won't get bogged down, on labor issues. And then state-owned enterprise reforms. You see, Sri Lanka has a lot of state-owned enterprises. A lot of them are loss makers. A lot of them are inefficient, accepting the fact that the government really cannot efficiently do business. So some need to be closed down. Some need to be privatized and given to the hands of the private sector, whether local or international. And where in strategic areas, the government certainly could have joint ventures and partnerships in strategic areas. And the country's security, and I'm talking here about food security, energy security, and other forms of security, could be enhanced, in other ways. So state-owned enterprise reforms need to also happen. So there are many reforms, and traditionally the government of the day, or the party that represented the main party, was opposed to a lot of these reforms. It's heartening to know that reality has dawned on them. They have responsibility now, and I'm hoping against hope that they will move ahead quickly with the reforms, and that will attract foreign investment. And the only way to sustain growth is actually increasing investment, both foreign and local investment.
And what kind of further assistance is still required from the global community?
Yes, so the global community has, focused a lot on the United Nations Human Rights Council. Sri Lanka has come out of conflict, years of conflict, and clearly in a conflict, as we all must admit, obviously there have been injustices perpetrated, and therefore people are looking for justice. And the Human Rights Commission has passed resolutions and are wanting Sri Lanka to adhere to the resolution. So that's one side of that equation. But if you go back in time and in history, lots of countries, including Sri Lanka, have had these issues. When it comes to principles on human rights and on killings and things like that, they are not justifiable under any circumstances, whether they are done by officials or military people outside the rule of law and internationally accepted norms, done by officials or done by the former LTT or done by the former JVP. It doesn't matter who, they are not acceptable. We are a democracy, we need to believe in the rule of law and go that route. So the question now is dealing with history. And when you try to deal with history, we shouldn't impair present growth, because you have sacrificed the past generations and you shouldn't be sacrificing the future generations. So the Sri Lankan government on one hand is trying to move basically on issues like people are looking for missing persons, and trying to establish the missing persons office. They're looking for reparations for the losses they have suffered. And these are all justifiable things that need to be done. But I think that the international community should take a more proactive role and assist the government in actually putting those things into practice, rather than just only focusing on creating opposition to it. Certainly the Sri Lankan government should move forward. The Prevention of Terrorism Act is one such issue that needs reform. This discussion has been going on for years and years. In fact, the present president running for office also promised to actually abolish it. I think it should be done away with, and a new act could be looked at in terms of security and defense. So lots of steps like this should be actually taken so that we create a Sri Lanka where every citizen feels equal while dealing with the historical blunders that were made.
All right, thank you so much for joining us on the telecast and sharing those insights. Meanwhile, viewers, my colleague Megha Sharma is on the telecast with us from the ground. I'll be tossing over to her. Megha, what are the details that are you picking up on the ground?